to my session. We will talk a bit about an introduction to TypeScript for Dataverse, and it will be like the setup of the Visual Studio project, so to say, what I will talk about. So that's first of all, I want to talk about me a bit. Benny Bergman, my name. I'm a Power Platform consultant at CRM Consultana here in Sweden. I'm coming from the developer background, .NET development, Angular, Dynamics, CRM, CE, and model-driven apps, and then Power Platform. Here you also have my contact information, Twitter, LinkedIn, mail, or my blog. I can pop it in the chat later as well. So the session goals is learning what TypeScript is, learn how to set up a TypeScript project, and then optimizing the project. And all of that you can also read on my blog. I can pop this link in the chat later as well. So the agenda will be, first of all, we will answer the question why to use TypeScript in the first place. Then we will do a basic setup. We will add Webpack. We will add ESLint and Prettier. And if we have time, we will add React. We will see how far we come. So what is TypeScript? TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, which means that if you have a TypeScript file and you write JavaScript in it, it is valid TypeScript as well. So you don't have to be scared of the move from JavaScript to TypeScript. You can do it over time. So you can just set up your TypeScript and create your TypeScript files and then copy your current JavaScript file into it, which will work. So you don't have to rewrite everything from the beginning. The second point is it's strongly typed. So if you create a variable and it's an integer, for example, or a number in TypeScript, then it will say or will show an error if you try to assign a string to it, which is very helpful during development. It is backwards compatible, which means in the end, the stuff you deploy to your Dataverse is still JavaScript. So TypeScript is only for development and makes the development easier. But at the end, you have to transpile your TypeScript to JavaScript, which means you, or the Webpack which we use to do that, can then say, okay, you are targeting a special JavaScript version. So it knows how to translate your TypeScript to this specific JavaScript version. And if you change the JavaScript version, your TypeScript could be the same, but the resulting JavaScript will be different. So you only have to write the same TypeScript, no matter which JavaScript version you are targeting, and your compiler or transpiler will handle the rest. So if you decide later on in the project, or now we want to move to a newer JavaScript version because we don't want to support an older one, you just make one configuration, recompile your stuff, and you have moved. You don't have to rewrite everything, which is quite smart. And then other stuff, if you target an older JavaScript version, for example, and you have, for example, awaits in your TypeScript, the compiler will automatically pop in the poly files to make it possible to use awaits, even so the old JavaScript version doesn't do it. So you don't have to bother which version you're using. And the last point is that it's much easier to test and debug when you have TypeScript. And then I talked about different stuff we want to take a look at. So I talked about Webpack, which we will use. And this one is a bundling thing. So in Dataverse, it's easier to have one JavaScript file for every form or every entity, for example. But while developing, it's maybe easier to have different files because you have shared code, or it's the file doesn't get so long if you have different files. So Webpack can take all the files, all the TypeScript files, and bundle them together to one JavaScript file at the end. So you can have really good structured files during development, but in the end, the stuff you deploy to Dataverse, it's just one JavaScript file, which makes it easier to deploy and increases the load time. So this is done via Webpack. The next one, ESLint, we will use. It ensures developer rules. So it's basically a spell check for your TypeScript. So you can use the standard rules, which we'll do today, but you can also define own rules. You can say we have a company-wide rule for TypeScript development, how it should be written, and then you can configure it once in ESLint, and it will be enforced over all your TypeScript files. And it's the same with prettier. So prettier is a syntax enforcement. So for example, that you use 4 spaces in the beginning of a line, or 5 or 2, depends on what you have configured. So there you also have a standard, which we'll configure today, but you can have own configurations. And the last one is React, which is JS, JavaScript front-end library, which is developed or created and developed from Facebook. And I think the most common used library in the web. Enough with the slides. Let's go into the demo directly. So I'll just switch to my other monitor. So here I'm in my folder. I have created a front-end folder already, as you can see here. And then I opened that one in Visual Studio Code. Oh yeah, requirements we have is I use Visual Studio Code, and I have installed Node.js already on my machine. That's needed for npm to install all the packages we need. So first of all, we have to create our folder structure, and not new file, new folder I need. I have to zoom in maybe. Let's zoom in. Appearance, zoom in. I do it twice. So now it should be better to read. So we create a new folder, which is called TypeScript, or TS. Then we have a new folder, which is called Web Resources. And inside of Web Resources, I usually have one for HTML, one for CSS, one for all the images, and one for JavaScript. So this folder structure is the one we will deploy, or which will be deployed to Dataverse later. So everything in this web resource folder should be deployed to Dataverse, which also means we write our code or have our source code in the TypeScript folder, but our output should be in this JavaScript folder, so that either we manually or our automated deployment process can then fetch all the files in here and deploy them to Dataverse. I usually use Sparkle from Scott Duro to do so. Inside of TypeScript, we have a new folder, which is source. And inside of this one, we have a new folder, which is code. And then we have a new folder, tests, where we could have our TypeScript tests inside of the TS folder. Here we are, and utils. So that's the folder structure I usually have. In addition to that, we also need some, for demo purposes, I created some very easy files. We will have a helper.ts just to show how the Webpack will bundle those. In the utils, I have a helper TypeScript, and that's just to get some records from. So it's a wrapper around the normal web API to make it a bit easier to use. And then we have a demo TypeScript, which will be directly in the code. new file, demo. And this can then be used as an onload function on our contact, and it should show all the the amount of related accounts. Yeah. So that's just for the demo later. Let's get into the setup. So first of all, we want to have a basic setup of our TypeScript. We open a new terminal. And in here, we go to the TS folder because we want to install all our NPM packages and so on in our TypeScript folder. And there we use npm init, which will create a package JSON. Hopefully. Oh yeah, it will ask some questions for sure. Version. Oh. Yes, fine. No tests, no git, no keywords. And the author. Yes. Good. So it has now created a package JSON, which will later contain all the packages we use. So this should be checked in. So the next developer that is checking out your project can just do an npm install to get all the packages he or she needs in this project. First of all, we have to install TypeScript via npm, and this one is done via npm install globally TypeScript. So this will now fetch the TypeScript package from npm and install it to our solution. It will create a folder, node modules folder, where all the modules or packages will be stored, and will write this one into our package JSON. Oh no, it's global, so it will not be in the package JSON, but we have to install it locally as well. So let's do that. So now I created a node modules folder. And the package JSON will be updated accordingly when it's done. Yeah, now we have a dev dependency, which is TypeScript, and in the node modules folder, we have TypeScript only until now. Next package we need is typings for Node. So you need to so that the TypeScript knows which functions are there and can make it strongly typed. You need to install typings of your different modules. So we will now install the typings for Node, which is the standard typings, and we will also install the typings for XRM, so that it knows all the function of the web API and which parameters does the function need and what does it answer and so on and so forth. So we make it strongly typed, basically. So we install add types /node and add types /XRM. And def. So the type for XRM, those are the very, very basic types. There are more complex typings for a Dataverse. For example, delegates XRM definitely typed, which is mainly for Magnus. But for the ease of this demonstration, we'll use just the basic XRM typings, which is enough for us. So now you've seen it has added those two to our dev dependencies. Next step is to initialize our TSC. And the TSC is the part which will transpile our TypeScript to JavaScript later on. So this one needs some configuration, for example, which target JavaScript do we have, and which modules, and so on and so forth. So we will just do an TSC init, which will also ask some questions.
Some other panel might be taking on it.
Sorry, is there a question?
Okay. I'll try reaching him because
sorry for that, it should be solved.
Okay, perfect. So the TSC init has now created a tsconfig.json here, and it's a huge file with a lot of out-commented stuff. And so we have to compile options, and here we have the target ES version, which is an ECMA script, and this is basically the versions of JavaScript. The standard is ES5, which is an older one. For Dataverse, we could switch to ES6 because Internet Explorer isn't supported any longer, or the support is going away. So you shouldn't use it. We could switch to ES6, which will, for example, doesn't need the await polyfiles because ES6 already knows how await works. But for now, we just leave it as the standard. And then there's different other stuff. We want to have strict, for example. This one is important for the solution checker. If your JavaScript doesn't or isn't strict, it will have a warning in it. Yeah, and such stuff. We will add more to it later. So first thing we have to configure here is our output. So if I would run my TSC now, I can maybe do it. TSC. It should create JavaScript files in the same folder where our TypeScript files are after a while. Oh. Can't find module. Oh yeah, sure. It's in the wrong folder. I created it in the wrong folder, the file. Let me just move it to code. Yes, move. That's better. So as you can see, it has created JavaScript files in the same directory, but we want to have our JavaScript files in the web resource directory. So let's configure that. I will delete those. Yes, delete. And tsconfig, and then there is somewhere an out dir, which is commented out. Here we are. And this one defines, yeah, what's the output directory, basically. And here we want to have /web resources /JavaScript. So now it will go one fold up, choose the web resources and then the JavaScript file folder. In addition to that, we would like to say to him which files to include, because we don't want to include the node modules. This. So we do just source, then every folder and every file inside of that. Yeah, we can switch to ES6 maybe. And then we add some stuff at the bottom of this configuration. Let's do it like this. So allow JavaScript means that what I mentioned earlier, if you have it on true, you can write JavaScript in your TypeScript and it will still compile or transpile. And then there's some other things which make it easier to develop those configurations here. So let's run our TSC once more. And now it should appear, or the JavaScript files should appear in this folder here. Hopefully. We'll see. Yes. So now we have a folder which is the helper, and a folder with, or a file which is helper, and a file which is demo. So now the basic TypeScript setup is complete. So you could deploy both of those files, write in TypeScript, and deploy those JavaScript files. Would be fine. But what we want to have is want to have one bundled file, which is only one demo.js, which includes all the functions from helper, which we use, so that we don't have to deploy so much, and the load time will be a bit better. So let's do that, and we do that by using Webpack. To do so, we have to install some more packages. So what we need is some packages for TypeScript and Webpack. So we need a Webpack type package. We need the Webpack CLI, which is the command line interface. We need a plugin for Webpack, which is Merge. We'll come to that in a minute. We need another plugin, which is Clean Webpack, to clean up folders. We come to that also. And then we need a TS loader. And the reason for that is Webpack in the basic installation, or in the core, only understands JavaScript, but not TypeScript. And so TS load is needed, or TS loader is needed to tell Webpack to use TypeScript. So we'll install them. And in the meantime, we can create some configurations already. So what we will create is, in the TypeScript folder, a new file which is called webpack.config.shared. And we also will create a file which is called webpack.config.dev.js. And the third file we will create is one for production. Webpack.config.js. And here you can see why we need this merge plugin for Webpack. So we will have one shared configuration which holds all the standard configuration, like the entry points and so on and so forth. And then we have smaller configurations which build on top of our shared configuration to configure stuff which is specific to either development or production. And this is basically, in production, we want to have our files minified, so that the load time is even better. And in development, we don't, because it's easier to develop if it's not minified. Yes, sure, I can just turn off the camera. Yeah, maybe that's good. We'll do it like this. So, and where was I? Yeah, so that's the shared one we will create now, and then we'll use it in the development and production one. So let's see the shared one. I will just paste it in here. What does it do? We use the web plugin Clean Webpack as we have installed. This one will just erase everything which is in our output folder before we create the new stuff. And that's basically because if you delete files, TypeScript files, you want to delete them in your output as well. Otherwise, they will just live there longer. But you don't want to have them because you don't want to deploy them because you have deleted them. So that we do with this plugin. Here up at the top, We will add source maps to make it easier to develop. We have our entry points, which is our demo TypeScript. So whenever you add a new file, you have to add a new entry point. Otherwise, it will not be in the output folder. So that's important. To every file you want to have a JavaScript file of, you have to add an entry here. Then we define our output, which is again in our web resources JavaScript, and the file name should be our entry point name .javascript. The maps should be in a folder which is called maps, and then our entry point name and javascript.maps. And the library is our namespacing. So in my example, if I want to use the onload function we have seen earlier, I have to write be.demo.onload. This is the namespace of my function. So it will always take the name of your entry point, suffix bb and prefix the bb and suffix the function name. Then we have some rules. So it should take only the TypeScript or TSX files. TSX is for React. Use the TS loader for it, but don't use the node modules folder. And then again, should resolve the extension TS and JS, because we only have TS at the moment, or JS maybe. So that's for the shared one. Then we have an easier one, which is for development. So here we use the merge plugin we installed earlier, and it will merge our shared configuration with this small part of the configuration. So we have the mode is development, and we inactivate the minimization so that it not only will be one line and minified, it will be a bit bigger file to make it easier to develop. And then even easier is the production one. Here we only set the mode to production and to merge it with shared configuration. Already. Yes, it is already on GitHub. So if I can pop the link to my blog later, and there you have a link to the GitHub. And I explain on my blog every step, so step by step. You can just follow it. So let's go to the next step. We have to configure package.json as well, because we have to add some comments or some scripts, I mean. So first of all, we want to have a build script, which will use our production configuration, and then we have a build dev, which uses our dev configuration. So if I now use npm run, let's say build, it will delete everything here. We only should have a demo.js at the end, and this one should be minified, hopefully. I just see that my video is flickering. I have to check my webcam. So now, as you can see, it has first deleted our content of the JavaScript folder, and then we have only our demo.js and the demo.js map for debugging. And the demo.js is minified one line and easy, or a bit smaller, which is better for the load time. So that's fine. If you now do it like build dev, which is our second command, it should be demo.js should be a bit bigger, which is a bit easier to read, or a lot easier to read actually. Yeah, So now you see this one is a bit better for development purposes, and it gets even easier if you use the map files later for development, because then you can just like debug inside of your TypeScript basically, which is much easier. And you also see the namespacing here. There's a question, do you also deploy the map files with JS on the Dataverse? I don't. We had some discussions on Twitter about that. Since I use Fiddler, I can just inject them while debugging. So I don't deploy them to Dataverse, but there are others that do, because they only get loaded when you do debugging. So it doesn't harm the normal user either. So it's more like what you think is better. You don't have to. You can do it without, but you can deploy them. It doesn't harm either. So here you have the namespacing, which is in my case BB, and then let's find it. This is everything. Where are we? I have to onload function. Here. So export onload is onload. That's a function which will be exported. And a bit further up should be our demo. Here it is. So it has bb.demo. So it's not very, you can't see it on the first slide. You have to search a bit, but the namespacing is like concash or all the namings here after each other. So libraries. So first bb, then the name of your file or your entry point, and then dot the function name. And this one needs to be written in Dataverse when you add like an onload event. You have to write like function name should be bb.demo.onload, for example. Otherwise, it won't find the function. And the idea behind that is if you have different files with the same function name onload, which is quite common, they don't override each other. So that's the normal case for namespacing. And now normally in JavaScript, you don't have it either, or if you don't implement it yourself, but with Webpack and TypeScript, you just get it out of the box, which is quite nice. It's a bit of a change at the beginning because you have to get used to your namespacing, but then it's quite good. Yeah, the helper file is shared in my GitHub as well, so you can take a look at it there if you want to. I can pop the link then later. So the next thing we want to install is ESLint and Prettier to enforce our spell check and also a bit of formatting, so to say. So let's open demo.ts. For example, if you have then Prettier, it will enforce that the first leading tabs or spaces are always the same, and so stuff, where the bracket should be and so on. So let's install that. Here we need a few more packages. So we need ESLint, first one. We need the parser or TypeScript ESLint parser, so that ESLint knows how TypeScript works and vice versa, or Webpack knows ESLint basically. Then we need the TypeScript ESLint plugin for Webpack. We need Prettier. We need ESLint config Prettier, and this one is needed that, or we use it for ESLint. So if you do our spell check, it should also run the Prettier to directly format everything in the correct way. So we need a plugin for ESLint to run Prettier, and that's that one. ESLint plugin Prettier. Yeah, one is the blog config and one is the plugin, and then ESLint Webpack plugin to run ESLint from Webpack. We install them. can you please show how to debug your script deployment file to Dataverse? If I have time, I can try to show it. We will see. And the second question is, what benefits do we get by using TypeScript as compared to JavaScript? Yeah, so that's basically an easier development because you have the typings, which say, yeah, it's strongly typed as you have it in C#, which you don't have in JavaScript. And you can split your file, or yeah, you can split in your code into different files to make it more easier to read. So that you don't have very long files, but at the end you still have one bundled file, and the backwards compatibility, so that oh, nice arrows. I have to check that. So the compatibility, that's a complex word. So you can target old JavaScript versions, but write the same TypeScript code, so to say. So what's the error here? Oh, not permitted. Let's try it again. So the next question is, how will be the learning curve to getting used to TS for Dataverse? Yeah, so in the beginning you will have some stuff to learn. For example, this namespacing I talked about. But other than that, it's not much, I think, because as mentioned earlier, you can write just JavaScript in your TypeScript files, and it should work as well. So you can move over time from JavaScript to TypeScript if you want to. So shouldn't be too much to learn, but it's a bit to learn either way. So now we have installed those plugins. It went through now, and we have to configure everything. So, oh yeah, another thing we have to install is ESLint globally and prettier. Yeah, and one thing to mention here, the thing we configure now is it will run ESLint and prettier whenever you do your build or compiling or transpiling. But you could also run it on the fly all the time while developing. But to do so, you need plugins for VS Code, which is ESLint and prettier plugin. And you have to configure something in VS Code. I think we should have time to do so. We will see. So first of all, we will do the ESLint configuration. To do so, we do npx ESLint init, which should create an ESLint configuration file. And here we choose some questions here, syntax and find problems. Check syntax. Yes. Type of modes. JavaScript modes, none of those. Yes, we have TypeScript, browser, and our configuration file should be JavaScript, or I use JavaScript because in JavaScript I can add add comments for the next developer. In JSON, it's not allowed to have comments, basically. So now it installed some additional packages it needs, and then it will create an how is it called? .eslint.rc.json or .js file, which is the configuration for ESLint, basically. So it should pop up here. Yes, here we are. And then we will just add this one. So here we say we have ES6. We will extend our ESLint with prettier. So as mentioned, as ESLint, if we run it, it also runs a prettier. We say which parser we need, which is the TypeScript parser for ESLint. Parser options, it should take everything from tsconfig, and source type is module in this case. The plugins we need is TypeScript ESLint, so that ESLint knows how TypeScript works, and prettier. And then we have some rules. So this one configures prettier, and this one is something I usually inactivate, no explicit any in some cases. That's the one. And then for prettier, we create our own file, which is called .prettier.rc.js, and it's an even more or even smaller configuration. Here you can say, for example, what is a tab width? In my case, I have 4 spaces. You could say 2 or 3, depends on what you want to have. The print width is how wide it will be, and so on. So you can configure a lot of stuff here. What's the end of line and so on. So this one can be customized pretty much. And then we have to add this one to our Webpack, so that Webpack automatically also runs ESLint and prettier. To do so, we add some stuff up here, ESLint plugin for Webpack, and this one should be run in our plugins here, like this. Usually I'd only want to run it on files which are dirty, so which have changed. But for the ease of the demo, I will just do it false and run every time on all the files. And then we need some package JSON. We need more commands. If we, for example, only want to run one of them, we can now run either format, so npm run format, which runs the prettier, or npm run lint, which will run ESLint only, if we need it in the middle of development, for example. And then, as mentioned, for VS Code, we need a new folder .vs Code. And in this one, we need the settings.json. And here we have to tell ESLint where our TypeScript is. Otherwise, it will look in the main folder, but we want to have it in the TypeScript folder. So let's see. If we now delete this one and run our npm run lint, it should say a warning that we need a return value, or we have to configure what it will be the type of our return value of this function. So on it. Yeah, here it already says it, missing return type of function, and it also, if we run it, it says missing return type of function. So if we add this one, not too much, it will run through. And if we, for example, change something in our formatting, it directly says, yeah, we have to insert something here from prettier. And if we run npm run format, write it correctly as well, format, it should reformat everything accordingly to our rules. And now you see it moved the brackets and has added some spacing there. So as you can write stuff, VS Code will tell you what you have to add and what the formatting should be. And with that, you can enforce a certain formatting in your whole company so that it's easier for other developers to come into a project and take over stuff or something like that. Yes. let me just check my documents. Yeah, so that's basically the setup we wanted to talk about. We could add React to it. Let's see, we can do that. I can, in the meantime, start my Fiddler. So there was a question how to debug it. I've not prepared a demo for it because it normally is in this talk, but I can quickly show it to you, or at least theoretically show you how I would do that. So I have now Fiddler here. So what I would do is I would build my stuff locally so that I have, wrong one, so that I have my demo.js and my demo.js map file here. And if this one is deployed to some environment, I can then in Fiddler, I have a blog post about this one as well, so feel free to look there. But in the autoresponder, you have to configure stuff. So basically, what I do here in this one is when the URL that is requested from my machine is something web resources, JavaScript, and then a JavaScript file, I want to not send this request to the server. I want to respond with a local file instead. And in my case, it's a customer local file here, and we'll take this file instead. So what this means is I don't have to deploy my JavaScript files. I can just rebuild them locally and test them directly against the Dataverse, because the changes will be taken from my local JavaScript file, and the same with the map file. So if the browser requests the map file, it will take it from my local machine. So I don't have to deploy them to Dataverse. That's basically how I do it. Yeah, and to do so, we can also add a watch command, actually. Let's see if I have it somewhere. Yes, I have it here. So let's take a look at that. So if we add this one here, so I could run build watch now, npm run build watch, which will watch our files, our input files, and whenever something is changing, it will rebuild those. So I don't have to run a build any longer. If I have Fiddler open, I can just change stuff here, save my file, go to Dataverse, and test it directly without doing anything else. So now it's watching, or it should watch. Let's see if it's already watching. No, it's starting up still, I think. Just to yeah, so now you have seen it. It just rebuilded it, demo 2 or 3. So if I save it, you can see down here that it will be rebuilt, and it also should be in the demo. Oh, I have to write it correctly. Yeah, here in the text it also says demo 2 now. So with that, I can just change my stuff in my demo TypeScript. The Visual Studio Code will directly rebuild it, and Fiddler will take the new code and inject it into my request. So I don't have to deploy it, but I still can test it against my Dataverse as it would be deployed. Yes. And no, the deployment into Dataverse isn't included, unfortunately. I don't think we have time, because I usually, as mentioned, I take Sparkle to deploy, and that's a whole setup for itself. But Scott has great videos on how to set it up. It is quite easy. You have to install Sparkle, NuGet Sparkle, and then have one configuration, and then you just run the bat file. Yeah. If it just reach out to me, I'm happy to jump on a call and we can do it together. In my blog is just how you deploy it from Sparkle if you have Sparkle set up in your automated pipeline. So how to use Sparkle in an automated pipeline, but not how to set up Sparkle, because Scott has great videos. But it's on my list, so it's one of the next blocks I want to release. So maybe in the next 1 or 2 weeks, I think. Yeah, you could. You can. The next question is, can you deploy only the JS and map files using XM Toolbox plugins? Yes. So they will be, the map files and JS files will be locally on your machine. So whatever method of deployment you can use, you can also use the normal XM Toolbox plugin. Absolutely. Any other questions? I think there was one. Yeah, you need to install Node.js so you can install the TypeScript transpile ADC. VS Code is just your editor. Oh yeah, that was a question, what you need in addition. VS Code, yeah, sorry, yeah, exactly. So you only need VS Code and you need Node.js, which includes npm to install the packages, as Joe mentioned. Perfect. That's it from me. I will just switch to the other monitor once more. Let's, that's nice. Yeah, so thank you, and thank you to the organizers and our sponsors. Really, really great effort. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Benedict. Very interesting session. I don't see another questions right now. Maybe I have a question about using ES6. I'm trying to move there, but I'm not very sure if there are problems. Did you have problems, for instance, in the lookup app? Because sometimes I think in the apps, maybe it's not pure HTML, maybe it's also the browser control where you might have problems. Did you had some problems somewhere?
No, I haven't actually. Until now, I haven't. And if you, there is a website which shows all the compatibility between browsers and ECMAScripts, and IE11 still don't support ES6, but since IE11 isn't supported with Dataverse any longer, or the support is going away, we don't have to bother. So I moved most of my projects to ES6, and I haven't had issues with it yet. Yeah.
That's good to know. In case you see something, I would like to know.
Yes, sure.
Thanks. Okay, so if there are no questions anymore, I'm gonna stop the recording. Thank you.